Queen Zarathel stood on the balcony of her palace, looking out at the 3 moons that hung over her home world. Her tall body was covered in dark green armor-like skin that had protected her people for millions of years. Sharp claws grew from her fingers, and her yellow eyes could see in complete darkness. She was the ruler of 17 star systems, and every creature in her empire feared her name. But tonight she was not thinking about war or ruling. She was thinking about Marcus. Marcus Chen sat in the garden below, reading a book under the soft glow of floating lights. He looked so small and weak compared to her people. Humans were strange creatures. They had no natural armor, no claws, no fangs. Their skin was soft and could be cut easily. They lived such short lives compared to her people. When Marcus first came to her world as a diplomat from Earth, Zarathel's advisors had laughed. General Corax, her military commander, had said humans looked like children playing at being adults. Commander Thesia had wondered how such weak creatures had even managed to build spaceships. But Zarathel found Marcus fascinating. He spoke softly and never raised his voice, even when her court nobles were rude to him. He seemed to know about so many things: art, music, plants, history. He could make her laugh with strange human jokes she did not always understand. When she decided to make him her royal consort, the entire court had been shocked. Some nobles whispered that their queen had gone mad. Others worried that she was showing weakness by choosing such a fragile creature as her mate. "My queen," General Corax had said during a private meeting, "this human will make you look weak. Our enemies will think you have grown soft." Zarathel had silenced him with a look that could freeze blood. "I will choose my own consort. Marcus stays. That had been 2 years ago. Now Marcus lived in the palace, and most of the court had gotten used to him. They still did not understand why their queen had chosen him, but they no longer dared to question her decision openly. Marcus spent his days doing things that seemed strange to the Vexani people. He grew plants in the palace gardens, teaching the servants about flowers and vegetables from his home world. He would sit for hours reading books, sometimes making notes in the margins. He liked to paint pictures of the palace and the people in it. The one thing that confused everyone the most was the sword he carried. It hung at his side in a simple black sheath, and the handle was decorated with strange symbols that no one could read. The blade was made of some kind of metal that did not shine like normal steel. When people asked Marcus about it, he would just smile and say it was a gift from his family. Most of the court thought it was just for show. Humans were weak, everyone knew that. What could a human do with a sword against a Vexani warrior? Their people could tear apart metal with their bare hands. Their claws could cut through armor. A human with a sword was like a child with a toy. General Corax often joked about it. "Maybe the little human thinks he can protect our queen with that tiny blade," he would say, making the other officers laugh. But Zarathel noticed things about Marcus that others missed. When they walked through the palace together, his eyes were always moving, watching everything. He remembered the names of every servant, every guard, every noble. He knew which passages led where, even in parts of the palace he had only visited once. Sometimes, when they were alone, Marcus would ask her questions about the empire. How many ships did they have? What were their main trade routes? Which species were their allies? He said he was just curious about her work, and she found his interest charming. Marcus was also surprisingly good at understanding politics. When nobles came to court with complaints or requests, he would listen quietly. Later, when they were alone, he would often give Zarathel advice about what the nobles really wanted, or what problems might be hiding behind their words. His suggestions were almost always right. "You are very wise for such a young species," she told him one evening as they shared dinner on the balcony. Marcus had smiled at her. "Humans have learned to watch and listen. We may not be strong like your people, but we try to be smart." Zarathel had reached over and touched his soft hand with her clawed finger. She had to be very careful not to cut him. "I am glad you are here with me." The court still whispered, of course. They could not understand how their fierce warrior queen could love such a gentle creature. Commander Thesia had once asked Zarathel privately if she was sure about her choice. "He seems kind." "My queen," Thesia had said carefully, "but in times of war, you need a mate who can fight beside you. This human, what would he do if enemies attacked the palace? Hide behind your skirts?" Zarathel had felt a flash of anger at the suggestion, but she also understood her commander's concern. The universe was a dangerous place. Their empire had enemies who would love to see her destroyed. If war came to their homeworld, Marcus would indeed need protection. The thought of him being hurt made her chest feel tight with worry. That night, as Marcus slept beside her in their shared chambers, Zarathel looked at his peaceful face in the moonlight. He looked so innocent, so trusting. He had no idea how dangerous her world really was. She had made sure of that, keeping him away from the worst parts of ruling an empire. When her generals planned military campaigns, Marcus was not invited. When reports came in about pirates or rebels, she made sure he did not see them. When executions were carried out, she sent him to visit other parts of the palace. She wanted to protect his gentle nature from the harsh realities of her rule. Sometimes she wondered what would happen if real danger came to their world. Would Marcus be brave, or would he freeze with fear? Would he try to fight, or would he accept that he needed to be protected? She hoped she would never have to find out. Marcus stirred in his sleep, and his hand moved toward the sword that lay on the table beside their bed. Even sleeping, he seemed to know where his weapon was. This struck Zarathel as odd, but she dismissed the thought. Perhaps it was just a human habit, like how her own people always slept with their claws ready. Outside, the palace guards made their rounds, and the ships of her fleet moved in slow patterns around the planet. Everything was peaceful and safe. Zarathel closed her eyes and let herself drift toward sleep, one arm protectively draped over her human mate. She had no way of knowing that in the darkness between the stars, something ancient and hungry was moving toward her empire, something that would soon test everything she believed about strength, weakness, and the true nature of the gentle human who shared her bed. In his sleep, Marcus's hand tightened slightly on his sword's handle, and for just a moment the metal seemed to grow warm in the darkness. The first reports came from the edge of the empire, from a mining colony called Zerion Prime. The message was short and filled with static, but the words that came through made Zarathel's blood run cold. They came from nowhere. Ships like nothing we've seen. Eating everything, everyone. Please send help. Then the signal died. General Korax stood before the emergency council, his face grim. We have lost all contact with Zerion Prime, my queen. Our scout ships report that the planet is gone. Gone? Zarathel leaned forward in her throne. What do you mean, gone? The planet is still there, but everything on it is dead. No plants, no buildings, no life of any kind. It looks like something stripped away every living thing and left only bare rock. The council chamber fell silent. In all their history, the Vexani had never heard of anything like this. They had fought wars with other species, but those wars were about taking territory or resources. This sounded like something else entirely. Commander Thesia activated a holographic display showing the outer edge of their empire. 3 days later, we lost contact with the research station at Kepler 7. Same thing. The station was simply empty. All the scientists gone, all the equipment destroyed. What about survivors? Zarathel asked. None. Whatever did this leaves nothing alive. Over the following weeks, more reports came in. The attacks followed a pattern. First, strange ships would appear at the edge of a system. The ships looked organic, like giant insects made of metal and flesh. They would land on planets and stations, and within hours, everything would be consumed. The enemy called themselves the Kthmore Horde. Intelligence reports described them as insect-like creatures, but much larger than any bugs found in nature. They had 6 legs, razor-sharp mandibles, and acid that could melt through metal. They seemed to exist for only one purpose, to consume everything in their path. What made them truly terrifying was their numbers. They did not come in hundreds or thousands. They came in millions, like a living wave that covered entire continents. Zarathel called her best military minds together to plan a defense. The meetings went on for hours, sometimes lasting through the night. Marcus would bring her food and try to get her to rest, but she could barely think about anything except the growing threat. They move too fast, General Korax said during one late-night session. By the time we get our fleets to a system under attack, everything is already dead. What about evacuations? Commander Thesia suggested. We could move the populations of the outer colonies to safer worlds. There are billions of people out there, another general replied. We don't have enough ships to move them all, and where would we put them? Zarathel rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. What do we know about their weaknesses? Very little, Korax admitted. Our weapons can kill individual Kthmore, but there are so many of them. For every one we destroy, 10 more take its place. Their bioships can regenerate damage faster than we can cause it. As the weeks passed, more colonies fell. The Kthmore were moving inward, getting closer to the heart of the Empire. Panic began to spread among the civilian population. Some planets tried to evacuate themselves, leading to chaos in the space lanes as millions of refugees fled toward the inner worlds. Zarathel barely slept anymore. She spent her days reviewing battle reports and casualty lists. The numbers were horrifying. Entire worlds with billions of inhabitants simply gone, consumed. Marcus tried to help in his own way. He would sit quietly during the strategy meetings, listening as the generals debated tactics and defenses. Sometimes he would ask questions that seemed innocent, but made the officers think about problems from new angles. "Have you tried communicating with them?" he asked one evening. "Maybe they want something specific. Maybe there's a way to negotiate." The generals looked at him like he was a child, suggesting they try to make friends with a hurricane. "Humans always think everything can be solved with talking," General Korak said with barely hidden irritation. "These creatures don't want to negotiate. They want to eat us." Marcus nodded politely but continued to attend the meetings. Zarathel noticed that he took notes, writing in a small book in the human language that none of her people could read. When she asked him about it, he said he was trying to understand the tactical situation. The breakthrough came when survivors from a research facility managed to escape in a damaged ship. They brought with them recordings of the Kthmore attack, and what they showed changed everything. The creatures were not just mindless beasts. They had organization, strategy, even what looked like technology. Their bioships worked together in complex patterns. They could adapt their tactics when faced with resistance. Worst of all, they seemed to be learning from each battle, becoming more effective with every world they consumed. This is not just a swarm of hungry insects, Zarathel realized as she watched the recordings. This is an intelligence, a thinking enemy. The implications were terrifying. If the Kthmore could learn and adapt, then every defense the Vexani came up with would only work once. The Empire was facing an enemy that got stronger with every victory. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Zarathel authorized the use of their most powerful weapons. Planet-killer bombs were deployed to try to stop the Kthmore advance. Entire star systems were evacuated and then destroyed to deny them to the enemy. It didn't work. The Kthmore bioships could survive in the vacuum of space. When planets were destroyed, they simply moved on to the next target. The desperate strategy only succeeded in destroying the Empire's own worlds. Fear began to creep into Zarathel's heart. For the first time in her life, she faced an enemy that her strength could not defeat. Her claws, her armor, her warrior's instincts. None of it mattered against an enemy like this. Late one night, as she sat alone in her study reviewing another stack of casualty reports, Marcus found her. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm going to lose everything," she whispered. "My people, my empire, everything my ancestors built." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Have you ever wondered how my species survived long enough to reach the stars?" Zarathel looked at him with tired eyes. "You were lucky. Your world had no major predators." Marcus smiled sadly. "Actually, our world was full of predators, some much larger and stronger than humans, but we're still here and most of them are not." Before Zarathel could ask what he meant, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Commander Thessia's voice echoed through the communication system. "My queen, we have multiple Kthmore bioships entering the home system. They've broken through our outer defenses. Estimated arrival at the planet, 6 hours. Zarathel felt her heart sink. The enemy had finally reached the heart of her empire. In 6 hours, everything would be over. She looked at Marcus, expecting to see fear in his eyes. Instead, she saw something else, something calm and cold that she had never noticed before. "I should get ready," Marcus said quietly, standing up and walking toward their chambers where his sword waited. The space battle above the homeworld was unlike anything in Vexani history. From the palace balcony, Zarathel could see the flashes of weapons fire in the darkness between the stars. Each burst of light meant ships were dying, and most of them were hers. The Kthmore bioships moved like living things, twisting and turning in ways that no normal spacecraft could match. They absorbed damage that should have destroyed them, their organic hulls healing almost as fast as the Vexani weapons could wound them. Worse, they seemed to learn from each attack. adapting their defenses in real time. Fleet Admiral Voss reports 30% losses. Commander Thessia announced from the communications station that had been set up in the throne room. The enemy ships are breaking through our defensive lines. Zarathel stood at the center of the chaos, trying to coordinate the defense of her world. Reports came in from across the planet as the first enemy vessels began to land. The Kthmore were establishing beachheads in the northern continent, and their numbers were growing by the minute. Marcus stood beside her, unusually quiet. He had not said much since the attack began, but Zarathel noticed that he was watching everything carefully. His eyes tracked the movement of troops on the tactical displays, and he seemed to be counting something in his head. "My queen," General Corax approached with grim news. "Our ground forces are being overwhelmed. The creatures are moving faster than we anticipated. They'll reach the capital city within hours. How many do we face?" Zarathel asked. "Millions, maybe tens of millions. They keep coming from the bioships like they have unlimited numbers." The reports that followed painted a picture of disaster. The Kthmore moved across the landscape like a living carpet, consuming everything in their path. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were reduced to empty shells in minutes. The civilian population was fleeing toward the capital, but many would not make it in time. "What about the planetary defense grid?" Zarathel demanded. "Offline," Thessia reported. "The bioships released some kind of electromagnetic pulse. Our heavy weapons are dead." Zarathel felt the weight of failure crushing down on her. She had failed her people, failed her empire. Soon the creatures would reach the palace and everything would be over. She turned to Marcus, who was still watching the tactical displays with that strange, calm expression. "You should go to the emergency bunker," she told him. "The palace guard will protect you as long as possible." Marcus looked at her with those soft brown eyes that had first captured her interest years ago. "What about you?" "I will make my last stand here in the throne room of my ancestors. It is the way of my people. And you expect me to hide while you die?" The question surprised her. In all their time together, Marcus had never spoken with such intensity. There was something in his voice she had never heard before. "You are not a warrior," she said gently. "There is no shame in surviving." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Zara, in all the time we've been together, have I ever lied to you?" "No," she replied without hesitation. "You are the most honest person I know." "Then trust me when I tell you that everything will be all right." Before she could ask what he meant, the palace shook as something massive impacted the outer walls. Through the windows they could see Kthmore bioships landing in the courtyard. The creatures were here. The sounds of battle echoed through the corridors as the palace guard fought desperately to hold the main entrances. Zarathel could hear the distinctive hiss of Kthmore acid eating through metal, and the screams of her warriors as they died. "They're in the lower levels," a guard reported breathlessly as he stumbled into the throne room. "The creatures are moving up through the service passages. We can't stop them all." Zarathel drew her ceremonial sword, a blade that had been carried by every queen of her line. It was sharp and strong, but she knew it would not be enough against the horde that was coming. Around the throne room, her remaining guards took defensive positions. These were her best warriors, veterans of a dozen campaigns. They would die well, but they would still die. The first Kthmore appeared at the main entrance to the throne room. It was larger than the reports had described, nearly 10 feet tall with 6 powerful legs and mandibles that dripped with corrosive acid. Its compound eyes reflected the light like black jewels, and its chitinous armor looked thick enough to stop bullets. More creatures followed the first, pouring into the room like a living tide. The palace guards opened fire, their weapons tearing chunks from the alien bodies. But for every Kthmore that fell, 2 more took its place. The battle was brief and brutal. The guards fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Within minutes, most of them were dead, their armor dissolved by acid or their bodies torn apart by razor-sharp claws. Zarathel found herself standing alone before her throne, facing dozens of the creatures. They moved in a semicircle around her, their mandibles clicking in what might have been communication. She raised her sword, ready to die as a warrior should, then Marcus stepped between her and the Kthmore. "Marcus, no," she cried out. "Get back!" But Marcus was not running. He was walking forward, toward the creatures that had destroyed her empire. His right hand rested on the handle of his sword, but he had not drawn it yet. The Kthmore seemed confused by this development. They had expected resistance from the armed guards, but this soft creature was approaching them with no apparent fear. Some of them tilted their heads, studying him with their alien intelligence. "You know," Marcus said conversationally, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "my people have a saying. The quiet ones are the most dangerous." One of the larger Kthmore took a step forward, acid dripping from its mandibles onto the stone floor where it hissed and bubbled. Marcus looked back at Zarathel one last time. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth sooner, but you're about to learn something very important about humans." He drew his sword. The blade that emerged from the sheath was nothing like what anyone expected. It did not gleam like normal metal. Instead, it seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a darkness that hurt to look at directly. The air around the weapon began to shimmer, as if reality itself was bending. The Kthmore closest to Marcus suddenly froze. Their primitive brains were sending alarm signals that they did not understand. This was not a normal weapon. This was something that should not exist. Marcus held the sword casually, as if it weighed nothing. "The thing about humans," he continued in that same conversational tone, "is that we learned very early in our evolution that the universe is full of things that want to kill us. So we got very good at killing them first." The largest Kthmore lunged forward with impossible speed, its claws extended to tear the small human apart. Marcus moved. What happened next defied everything Zarathel thought she knew about physics, about weapons, about her gentle human mate. The sword cut through the attacking creature like it was made of paper, but that was not the impossible part. The impossible part was that the blade somehow extended, reaching 3 other Kthmore that were nowhere near Marcus and cutting them down as well. The human who had spent 2 years reading poetry and tending gardens moved like death itself, flowing between the alien creatures with a grace that made Zarathel's warrior training look clumsy. His sword cut through their armor as if it did not exist, and each swing seemed to violate the laws of nature. One creature tried to spray him with acid. The liquid simply stopped in midair, as if it had hit an invisible wall, then fell harmlessly to the floor. Another attempted to strike him with claws that could tear through steel. The claws passed through empty space as Marcus was suddenly somewhere else, his blade already moving to end another life. Within moments, the floor of the throne room was covered with the bodies of creatures that had been unstoppable. Marcus stood in the center of the carnage, not even breathing hard, his strange sword still humming with barely contained energy. He looked at Zarathel, and she saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and she had simply never known how to recognize it. "Now," Marcus said quietly, "let me show you what humans do to species that threaten the ones we love." Marcus moved through the palace corridors like a force of nature. Zarathel followed behind him, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The gentle human who had read her poetry and grown flowers in their garden was cutting through the Kthmore invasion, like they were nothing more than annoying insects. BT, sword in his hand, continued to defy everything she knew about weapons. When a group of creatures attacked from a side passage, the blade somehow extended itself, becoming a whip of dark energy that wrapped around multiple enemies and cut them apart. When acid was sprayed in his direction, the air around Marcus shimmered and the deadly liquid simply evaporated before it could touch him. "How is this possible?" Zarathel whispered as they passed through what had once been the palace's main hall. The floor was covered with Kthmore bodies, all killed with surgical precision. "Human technology," Marcus replied without slowing down. "We've been developing it for a long time." They reached a window that looked out over the capital city. The sight that greeted them should have been hopeful. The Kthmore advance had stopped. All across the city, the creatures were pulling back, retreating toward their bioships. But Marcus did not look pleased. "They're regrouping," he said, studying the alien movements with a tactical eye that Zarathel had never seen before. "The Kthmore have a hive mind. They're sharing information about what just happened. Is that bad?" Marcus touched a small device on his wrist, and suddenly the air filled with a soft blue light. A holographic display appeared, showing the space around the planet. Zarathel gasped. There were not dozens of Kthmore bioships in orbit. There were hundreds. They brought their entire invasion fleet, Marcus explained. "This wasn't just an attack on your world. This was meant to be the final battle for your empire." The display zoomed in on one of the larger bioships. It was easily 10 times the size of the biggest Vexani battleship, its organic hull pulsing with some kind of internal energy. As they watched, smaller ships began emerging from openings in its side. Reinforcements, Zarathel realized. They're sending more troops to the surface. Yes, and now they know that their ground forces can't handle the situation. So they're going to try something else. As if responding to his words, the bioships in orbit began to glow. Energy was building up along their hulls, focusing into weapon systems that had not been used before. They're going to bombard the planet from space, Marcus said grimly. Turn the entire surface into molten rock. Zarathel felt despair wash over her. Even if Marcus could fight the creatures on the ground, he could not reach the ships in orbit. Her world was still doomed. But Marcus was touching his wrist device again, entering some kind of code. Prometheus, this is Shepard. Authentication code 77 Alpha. Initiate Protocol Omega. Confirmed, Shepard, a voice replied from the device. It sounded human, but there was something artificial about it. Protocol Omega is active. ETA 2 minutes. Prometheus? Zarathel asked. My ship, Marcus replied. She's been waiting in the outer system, cloaked and monitoring the situation. Before Zarathel could ask more questions, something began happening in space. The stars themselves seemed to shift, and then new shapes appeared among the Kthmore fleet. Sleek vessels that had not been there moments before, their hulls reflecting light in ways that made them hard to look at directly. One ship? Zarathel asked, counting at least 30 new vessels. One ship, Marcus confirmed. The others are her escort fleet. We've been watching this system for 2 years, ever since I arrived. We knew something like this might happen eventually. The human ships moved with impossible grace, weaving between the bioships like dancers. But their dance was deadly. Beams of energy lanced out from their weapons, and wherever they touched, the Kthmore vessels simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply gone, as if they had never been there at all. What kind of weapons are those? Zarathel breathed. Gravitational disruptors, Marcus replied casually. They collapse the quantum structure of matter, very effective against organic ships that rely on biological integrity. The battle in space was not a battle at all. It was an extermination. The Kthmore bioships, which had seemed so terrifying and unstoppable, were being erased from existence faster than Zarathel could count. Some tried to flee, but the human ships were impossibly fast, catching them before they could escape to hyperspace. How long have your people been this advanced? She asked. Marcus considered the question. We've had this level of technology for about 50 years, but we've been working toward it for much longer. 50 years. But when you first made contact with other species, you seemed so primitive. That was the idea. The human fleet had finished with the bioships. Now they were targeting the creatures on the planet's surface. Beams of energy descended from orbit with pinpoint accuracy, striking only the Kthmore forces while leaving everything else untouched. Within minutes, the invasion was over. Marcus touched his device again. Prometheus, this is Shepard. Threat neutralized. Begin cleanup operations. Acknowledge, Shepard. Cleanup operations initiated. Biological matter recycling in progress. Zarathel watched in amazement as the human ships began some kind of process that made the dead Kthmore bodies simply dissolve into nothing. Even the acid that had damaged the palace floors was being somehow removed, leaving no trace that the creatures had ever existed. You're erasing all evidence of them, she realized. Standard procedure. Marcus nodded. The Kthmore have been a problem for several species in this galaxy. Now they're not a problem anymore. You destroyed their entire invasion fleet. Billions of creatures. Yes. In less than 10 minutes. We've been tracking them for months. We knew exactly where they were and what their capabilities were. This was not a battle, Zarathel. This was pest control. The casual way he said it sent chills down her spine. She was beginning to understand that everything she thought she knew about humans was wrong. The diplomatic missions, she said slowly. The cultural exchanges. The trade agreements. None of it was real. Marcus turned to look at her, and his expression was gentle again. The warrior who had just orchestrated the destruction of an entire species had disappeared, replaced by the soft-spoken man she had fallen in love with. The feelings were real, he said quietly. Everything between us was real. But yes, the diplomatic mission was a cover. We needed to study your species, learn about your military capabilities, understand your culture and psychology. To decide if we were a threat, to decide if you were potential allies. The universe is a dangerous place, Zarathel. There are species out there that make the Kthmore look harmless. Humanity learned long ago that we need friends if we want to survive. Through the window, they could see the last of the human ships completing their cleanup operations. Soon there would be no evidence that the invasion had ever happened, except for the damage to the palace and the memories of those who had witnessed it. Your people will have questions, Marcus said, about what happened here. About what it means for the future. Zarathel nodded slowly. They will want to know if humanity is our friend or our new master. That, Marcus replied, depends entirely on what you decide. 3 days after the Kthmore invasion, Zarathel sat in her restored throne room facing a decision that would change the future of her empire. The human ships still hung in orbit, their weapons silent but their presence impossible to ignore. The palace had been repaired with technology that worked faster than anything her people possessed, and every trace of the battle had been removed. But the memory remained. Marcus stood before her, no longer wearing the simple robes of a royal consort. Instead, he wore a uniform that marked him as a high-ranking officer in something called the Human Intelligence Corps. The sword at his side was properly secured in a military harness, and his entire demeanor had changed from gentle scholar to professional soldier. Your real name isn't Marcus Chen, is it? Zarathel asked. It is, he replied. But my rank is colonel, and my assignment was to conduct a long-term evaluation of the Vexani Empire for potential integration into the Terran Alliance. Integration. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. You mean conquest? No, Marcus's voice was firm. I mean partnership. There's a difference. Around the throne room stood representatives from across her empire, generals, admirals, planetary governors, and trade leaders. All of them had come to hear what the humans wanted, and what it would mean for their people. General Korak stepped forward. Colonel Chen, my queen, has asked me to speak for the military. We need to understand what we're facing. How many ships does humanity have? Marcus activated his wrist device and a holographic display filled the center of the room. It showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with thousands of points of light scattered across it. These are human colonies and outposts, Marcus explained. We have been expanding across the galaxy for over 200 years. The Vexani representatives stared in shock. The map showed human presence in sectors they had never even explored. Entire spiral arms of the galaxy were dotted with human settlements. How many people? Commander Thessia asked quietly. Current population is approximately 800 billion, spread across 12,000 worlds. The number was staggering. The entire Vexani Empire had only 50 billion people across 17 systems. And your military? General Korax pressed. The fleet you saw was a single patrol group, Marcus replied. We maintain approximately 50,000 ships of various classes throughout human space. The ship that destroyed the Kthmore fleet, the Prometheus, is considered a medium-sized frigate. Zarathel felt the weight of realization crushing down on her. Everything she had thought she knew about the balance of power in the galaxy was wrong. Humanity was not a small, weak species struggling to survive among stronger neighbors. They were the dominant force in this region of space, and they had been hiding that fact for decades. Why? She asked. Why hide all of this? Why pretend to be weak? Marcus gestured to the display, which now showed the territories of various alien species. Because open displays of strength lead to fear, and fear leads to desperate actions. When a strong species reveals itself too early, other species unite against it. They form alliances, share technology, coordinate attacks. But when a species appears weak, others ignore it while it quietly grows stronger. The Great Deception, Zarathel murmured. You've been playing a game that spans centuries. Every human diplomatic mission, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange has been part of a larger strategy, Marcus confirmed. We study other species, learn their strengths and weaknesses, and decide how to approach them. And if you decide a species is a threat? Marcus was quiet for a moment. The Kthmore were not the first species to be removed from the galaxy. They will not be the last. The casual way he said it sent shivers through the assembled Vexani. They were dealing with a species that could erase entire civilizations and did so as a matter of policy. What about us? Zarathel asked. What did you decide about my people? That's what I'm here to discuss. Marcus waved his hand and the display changed to show detailed files on every major Vexani world. Your species has several qualities that make you valuable as allies. You're natural warriors, which we respect. Your technology, while not as advanced as ours, shows creativity and potential. Most importantly, your people have a strong sense of honor and loyalty. But, Sarathel could hear the qualification in his voice. But your empire is built on conquest and domination. You rule through fear and force. That makes you dangerous neighbors. General Corax bristled at the implied insult. We are warriors. It is our way. And it's a way that leads to conflict, Marcus replied calmly. Humanity learned long ago that the most successful empires are built on cooperation, not conquest. The display changed again, showing a new map. This one revealed something that made Sarathel gasp. More than half of what she had thought were independent species were actually part of something called the Terran Alliance. These species chose to join us, Marcus explained. They maintain their own governments, their own cultures, their own militaries. But they agree to certain principles of behavior. No conquest of other alliance members, no slavery, no genocide. In return, they receive protection, advanced technology, and access to the largest trade network in the galaxy. And if they refuse to join? Commander Thessia asked. Then they remain independent as long as they don't threaten alliance members or interests. And if they do threaten you? Marcus's expression hardened. Then they are removed as the Kthmore were removed. The throne room fell silent as the assembled Vexani absorbed this information. They were being offered a choice, but it was a choice with only two real options. Join the human alliance or risk eventual destruction. You're asking us to give up our independence, General Corax said. No, Marcus replied. I'm asking you to give up your aggression. There's a difference. Sarathel stood up from her throne and walked to the center of the room. What would membership in this alliance mean for my people? You would keep your government, your military, your territory, but you would agree to resolve disputes through negotiation instead of war. You would open your borders to alliance trade and cultural exchange, and you would contribute ships and personnel to the alliance defense force. Defense against what? Marcus touched his device again, and the display showed the outer edge of the galaxy, dark regions where no stars shone, and things that moved in the empty space between galaxies. There are threats out there that make the Kthmore look like children playing with toys, he said quietly. Ancient species that have been sleeping for millions of years. Entities that exist outside normal space-time. Machine intelligences that consume entire star systems for fuel. Humanity has been preparing for these threats for centuries, building alliances and advancing technology. When they come, and they will come, we want the Vexani fighting beside us, not against us. Sarathel looked around the room at her advisors and generals. She could see the fear in their eyes, but also calculation. They were warriors, and they understood the logic of forming alliances against greater threats. If we agree to this, she said, what guarantees do we have that humanity won't simply absorb us over time? None, Marcus replied honestly. But consider the alternative. You can remain independent and face the coming darkness alone, or you can join the alliance and face it together. The choice was not really a choice at all, and everyone in the room knew it. The Vexani Empire could continue as it was and eventually face destruction, or it could adapt and survive. I need time to discuss this with my advisors, Sarathel said. Of course. Marcus bowed formally. The Prometheus will remain in orbit for 1 week. After that, we will need your answer. As the meeting broke up and the advisors filed out to begin their deliberations, Sarathel found herself alone with Marcus for the first time since the invasion. Was any of it real? She asked quietly. The love, the partnership, the time we spent together? Marcus removed his military cap and set it aside. For a moment, the gentle man she had fallen in love with was visible again. All of it was real, he said. The mission brought me here, but what I felt for you was never part of the assignment. And now? Now we have a chance to build something new together. Not as conqueror and conquered, but as equals, as partners in something larger than either of our species could achieve alone. Sarathel looked out at the stars, where human ships waited with weapons that could erase her civilization from existence. But she also thought about the threats Marcus had shown her, the darkness that waited at the edge of the galaxy. The universe is bigger and more dangerous than I ever imagined, she said. Yes, Marcus agreed, but it's also full of possibilities. Together, we might actually have a chance to survive what's coming. 1 week later, the Vexani Empire formally joined the Terran Alliance. It was the beginning of a new age, one where humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to appear harmless while preparing for war, had created the largest peaceful alliance in galactic history. And in the palace garden, Marcus Chen tended to his flowers while wearing the uniform of an alliance colonel. The bridge between two worlds and two peoples who had learned that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged, not in the heat of conquest, but in the quiet moments between the storms.